Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with TV Mohandas Pai, the chairman of Aarin Capital Partners, which is a venture capital firm, as well as former CFO and head of the HR of Infosys, and R Jagannathan, editorial director of Swarajya, which is a pro-BJP, pro-RSS, pro-government magazine and news portal. Gentlemen, welcome to the Print Debates.
Thank you.
And today I have two of the best minds speaking on this subject. We are talking about discussing, debating the controversy over the weekend when Panchjanya, the pro-RSS magazine, led with a piece on Infosys, called it anti-national. The editor of the magazine has stuck to his guns. He says that Infosys has to come and explain why there are continuing to be glitches in the tax portal. Mr. Pai, your first comments on what's going on, and why do you think that Infosys is being attacked in this manner?
Well, I think it is the writing of a demented, crazed mind. That's the only reason I can think. Because, it is true that the portal is not up to the expectation of user. There are technology challenges. It's being set right. There's interaction with the government, and a lot of good things have happened in the last 2.5 months, which sadly, they've not been able to tell the public. That is true. But to accuse Infosys of being anti-national, part of the Tugde gang because of something else, and all kinds of irrelevant statements, which are so irrelevant to us in Bangalore. Because in Bangalore, you don't hear of any Tugde gang, any anti-national activities, etc. We quietly do our work. We quietly, work in technology and do many things else. So that is shocking. So to my mind, the first thing I can say is the rantings of a demented, crazed mind who does not know what is happening on the ground and trying to link one with the other. So I don't know why they made the statement. But Jyoti, I'm very happy that the RSS has disowned the statement. That's right. Because suddenly many people are trying to link it to government and everybody. And I've been on record to say it's got nothing to do with government. These are the writings of the extended part of the political parivar that rules this country, who sadly still believe they're in the opposition.
So you're right, Mr. Pai. The RSS spokesperson, Mr. Sunil Ambekar, has indeed disowned the statement. He says it has nothing to do with the RSS. But the fact, Mr. Jagannathan, if I may come to you, the Panchjanya has, like the organizer, has long been accepted as the mouthpiece of the RSS. So suddenly to turn around and say that, the accusations made in the article, like you said, Mr. Pai, that Infosys is like the Tukre gang, leftists, anti-national. I mean, these are strong words. Why would somebody even in their wrong mind say this about Infosys?
Well, there is no curtailment of anybody's ability to rant in this country. So you can. So that's a different thing. I certainly don't think this is the RSS viewpoint, but there is certainly an editorial view that has come from there, though it is not well articulated and very little backing in facts. Yeah. So there is a problem. Also, I'd like to correct one statement you made that I'm pro-BJP, pro-RSS. That's not correct. We started out basically as a counterpoise to the left-Luthians kind of cabal in Delhi. So in that process, we got identified in the other side, but we criticized this government or the RSS or BJP when required, as I am going to do today. I mean, if this is the RSS view, which they have declined to accept as their view, I think they are silly. But the point is this, that it is the RSS economic philosophy is a little fuzzy. They are not very comfortable with market economics, whereas Swarajya clearly is. They are not very comfortable with large capital, which is, again, their point of view. So in that ecosystem, there will always be somebody who may rant against an Infosys, or just like you have an Arvind Kejriwal or something ranting about, Ambani.
This is, sorry to interrupt, but this is a bit different, isn't it? I mean, Infosys is perhaps India's first really Atmanirbhar company, right? I mean, it employs over 2.5 lakh people. It has from Wikipedia, and this is a figure that I got off Wikipedia. It's more than $100 billion worth. So why would Panchjanya? I'm sure the editor should at least check Wikipedia like I'm doing and should know better.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I think there are two things. One thing, a company like Infosys is not beyond criticism, but it has to be legitimate criticism backed by facts. This one was more like a rant, a general dislike for the company or some such thing. The only basis, in fact, was that there has some trouble with the government's income tax portal, which will get fixed. That I think Mohandas is probably better equipped to say what the issues might be and all that. Or personally, I can say even that will get sorted out when you have a single customers and a very demanding customer like the government, and you want an income tax portal and you have all kinds of demands. It's very difficult for any company to get it right the first time. Let's not forget the previous income tax portal took 8 years to stabilize.
Yeah.
Okay. So we should see this in comparison with that, because it's a very complex demands being made from millions of both users and from the government departments. So
Right.
that's a different thing altogether.
But Mr. Pai, what does this do to Indian industry? I mean, you're in Bangalore right now, which is the sort of the heartbeat of India's software industry. There's an idea a minute that's coming up, right, in Bangalore. Now, what is a statement like this or a lead story? It's not even some little 2-paragraph diary item that's tucked away on page 29 or something. It is the lead story. It's called Stark or Aghat, Reputation and Harm. It's a direct accusation and nobody's denied. I mean, so Sunil Ambekar has denied it, but no heads have rolled in Panchjanya. You would imagine that the editor would be told to back off, but he hasn't.
Well, Jyoti, to people of my generation and people in the software service industry, it has really hurt us a lot and made us very angry. Because we are the ones who worked very hard for India. We are the ones who stayed back in India when we could work abroad in any country and built value for India. We sacrificed a lot. We built this country. We are ill-treated by people around the world. Our passport was not worth anything because of bad Nehruvian economics, which made us poor. And we gave respect to India. We created enormous amount of jobs. We created a massive job for the middle class. We have stood up for India. We have set standards in corporate governance. And after all that to be spoken of as anti-national, Tukde gang associated with New Delhi and all that, we felt very bad and we are very angry. Mm-hmm. But Jyoti, let me tell you one thing. To the younger generation in the startup economy, who are the innovators and who run Bangalore, who are all over the place, this has become totally irrelevant. They don't know who Panchjanya is. They heard of the RSS remotely somewhere. They're far away from Delhi. The Tukde gang is something they see once in a while when they see a newspaper, because they don't read newspapers. And this anti-national is something they hear far away. Their views are on innovation. There is excitement. The new India is being created here. For them, this is just background noise. But to me, and we are all part of the same generation. We saw the shift from a very controlled economy to a much more freer economy, and who have been through shortages and pain with no future for us in the India of the 70s and 80s to a great future which we build. We struggle. All of us, we struggle hard to build this country. It pains us deeply that somebody is questioning our patriotism and telling us, but we console ourselves, Jyoti, by saying that, look, these are irrelevant lands. Let us get on with their life, but let us oppose them firmly and put them in their place.
Mr. Pai speaks very passionately, Jaggi, but he has a point. The point is that he's saying that in Bangalore, when you're so busy coming up with new ideas and doing exciting new things, nobody really cares about Panchjanya. So don't you think that the RSS would be upset with something like that you're not in tune with the heartbeat of India?
What is the heartbeat of India? I mean, the heartbeat of India is the new and the thousands of new startups that are creating. Let's not forget one thing. The new India is going to be built by startups. It will not be built by the old economy companies, because however big they may be billion-dollar companies or 10 billion, 100 billion, but they will not create the jobs. The jobs.
So the question is, isn't the RSS, the fact that the RSS is being accused indirectly, is being accused of being irrelevant and not in step or not in tune with these companies, these companies that are sort of growing so fast. Shouldn't this worry the RSS?
Yeah, it should. I don't think we should make the same mistake that China is doing now when it's at the pinnacle of power. They're trying to cut down the Alibabas and Didis and 10 cents to size. So we should not be participating in any denigration of our own iconic companies. So I definitely think the message must have gone through to the RSS, which is why they distance themselves from Panchjanya. But a paper like Panchjanya is more in the cultural space. So if they have something to rant about in the business space about which they know nothing, we should ignore it. I don't think we should look at it as some kind of huge this thing. I think the less we talk about them, the better it is. I think if somebody like a Mohan Bhagwat says that, look, I think Infosys is doing damage to India or whatever, then I can say we should take it seriously. But not the editor of one of their one of their publications. So, and publications are allowed to have their own views, just like your view may be different by one. Sometimes my articles come in the print, but do they represent the views of the print? No, they don't. They just are a different.
I mean, I think this is a little different, Jaggi, because your article in the print, which is the opinion pages, is very different from the lead article in Panchjanya, which is a mouthpiece of the RSS. But Mr. Pai, let me ask you, Jaggi says that Panchjanya is just another mouthpiece, say, of the RSS, and that nobody really cares about the editor of Panchjanya. But Piyush Goyal, who is perhaps one of the most powerful men in this government, he is Minister for Commerce, Industry, Textiles, Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution. He has so many portfolios that I have to read. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when he was speaking to the CII, again, he was very critical of Indian industry, and a lot of industrialists in that meeting were left baffled because he said things like, and again, pointedly, repeatedly, in speaking to the Tatas, that you are doing things that are against India's national interest.
Jyoti does a good point, because I know Mr. Piyush Goyal well. I met him several times, engaged with him. I found him to be very reasonable, very proactive on business. And to hear him take off on Indian industry was a bit surprising and a bit shocking. So I don't know what made him do that, because he has not explained it. I would only imagine that is the stress of being a minister who has to take care of all constituencies. I made a remark in an interview to say that business has every right in India and elsewhere to ask for whatever they want. It is their right. They have industry association like CII and FICCI to come together, tell the government. It is the government role to listen to business and do policy which is good for all its constituencies, including consumers, traders, and everybody else. So business cannot, there's nothing wrong with business asking for the moon. It's up to the government to understand and do what they think is good for the country and for all its citizens. That is their role. So there will be conflict between the two aspects, and they must learn how to do it. So in that aspect, I think Piyush shouldn't have done it, and I think it's very, very wrong. I'm sure when we all meet him, we'll tell him that, look, whatever may be your anger or the stresses of having to cater to many diverse parts of this country, because, the retailers in this country are very diverse needs. They're very angry about e-commerce, and there has been holes in the policy, and the policy has been possibly misused by these big e-commerce companies to create surrogate enterprises funded by well-known people, which are not in the spirit of the law. That is all true, and they're getting hurt. So there is tension, but the other ways of handling it instead of taking off against industry. So I think we got to push back and say this is not right. Let's not get into this conflict.
Okay, so Jaggi, let me just read out to you, and this is from the Hindu newspaper. Mr. Goyal calling out the Tata Sons president for infrastructure, defense and aerospace, Banmali Agarwala, expressed deep anguish that Tata Sons was opposing rules to help consumers framed by his ministry. Me, myself, my company. We all need to go beyond this approach, Mr. Goyal said. And then he goes on to add, क्या आपकी जैसे कंपनी एक दो अपने शायद कोई विदेशी कंपनी खरीद ली होगी, उसका इंपॉर्टेंस ज्यादा हो गया, देश हित कम हो गया. What do you make of his comments?
Well, I don't know the full context of it, but I do believe that, companies will lobby for their interests, whether you like it or not. As Mohan said just now, I think the government can still take a neutral position and see what is best in the overall interest of the country and its policies and what serves the best thing. And also, in fact, some years back, the US Business Roundtable made a clear statement that shareholder interest is no longer our primary concern. We have many stakeholders and we have to look after all of them. So if you look at this statement in that context, you will actually say that, okay, what is good for Tata Sons is not necessarily always good for a country, or for that matter, what is good for Infosys may not always be the same thing as good for them. I mean, once upon a time, the US said that what's good for General Motors is good for them.
But right now we're talking about this. This government, Prime Minister Modi has been so emphatic on the Atmanirbhar principle, self-reliance, right? Now, for Piyush Goyal, for Mr. Goyal, who is one of the most powerful men in this government, to use words like Desh Hit, national interest. I mean, Jaggi, I think to accuse a company like Tata Sons, like Infosys, would you say that this was unfair, over the top?
Yeah, I don't think he should have made that kind of statement. He should have been more moderate and said what is the difference that he has with Tata Sons, should have been more specific on that. But my guess is, as a trade and commerce minister who is trying to build FTAs with the European Union and America and some others, but non-Chinese FTAs, there I think probably the pressure from some of Indian industry, where they are worried about some aspects of the FTA, are probably proving to be problematic for Piyush Goyal in his negotiations, because there are a lot of interests here. Like say, with EU, our problem is automobiles, imports, duties, and all that. So Tata's with interest in Tata Motors, JLR, and other things have their own interests. So, but an FTA is not going to happen unless these conflicting interests are reconciled. So he's talking as a trade minister who's trying to get FTAs done in order to, now that we have opted out of RCEP, he's trying to create ones with EU and the US. That will create conflicts with some aspects of some Indian industries who have their own interests. So that's where I think the conflict is coming from.
So, Mr. Pai, the impression that, ordinary people like us get, I mean, it's a bit startling, right, when you hear one after the other. So there's these two incidents, one by Mr. Piyush Goyal and the other one by the Panchjanya article, within the same month, makes you wonder whether the government is against, industry. And this is not industry which is a foreign company. These are Indian companies.
Jyoti, what you say is right. It has sent bad feelings amongst business and everywhere else, and has created fear among business as to what is the government thinking, what is the government doing. Because we must understand that the current political party has an extended social and political parivar. There are too many parties around them, and everybody thinks that they're all part of the same organization, so that when some part of the parivar makes a statement, everybody thinks it's the government's view or the political party running the government's view. That's what we think. In that context, what you said is very right. I agree with you that this is very worrisome and this is unnecessary, and we don't know. There's a point of confusion in industry as to what all this means. Is the government against the industry? Is the government everything else? But you look at all the government policies, Atmanirbhar Bharat, the defense policy and everything else is all been pro-Indian business. Even going after crony capital has been pro-Indian business. Despite doing all this, despite the promise, the Prime Minister making the promise that we will release you from unnecessary compliance, even in the insurance, even in the Independence Day speech, you see this happening. It is worrisome. I hope that other political leaders, the government will clarify this and put it to rest. But what you say is right. Ordinary people like you and me and others who don't understand, I mean, you understand politics, I don't understand politics so much. Jaggi possibly understand much more.
No, you understand it very well, Mr. Pai. You understand politics and economics and industry very well.
I understand the intersections, fairly well, Jyoti, but I'm not very deep into that. But I don't understand the machinations behind politics. I don't understand that because I'm from Bangalore. We live in a different world, Jyoti. But I know what you say is right. I agree with you. It is unnecessary. It's created confusion. I do hope the Prime Minister or somebody later, in his own inimitable style, will clear this confusion, and Mr. Piyush Goyal himself will talk somewhere and maybe explain and set it to rest.
What do you think, Jaggi? Do you think that you know this government well? Do you think that this created a bit of a stir inside the government, Mr. Goyal's remarks?
I think there are pulls and pressures within the government. And I think the UP elections are looming ahead, just 6 or 7 months away. So I think the Sangh is supposed to contribute a lot to the foot soldiers in that election, because this is very crucial both for the BJP and others. So government obviously needs to balance its economic agenda with some parts of the political one. So the pressures from people who are supposed to help the government through in UP and elsewhere will be pretty high. So that's where the probably discord is coming from. But I don't think Mr. Modi is going to allow this beyond a point. There may be some voices here and there. After 2018, Mr. Modi has been very clear that the damage done to business confidence by going extraordinarily hard against black money, corruption, demonetization has been too high. And after that, he has changed course and he clearly said good businesses will support. Then he's gone to Atmanirbhar Bharat and all that. So from the top, I think the message is the right one. But individual ministers and individual pressures and pressures from the Sangh at some level cannot be discounted, but because they are also stakeholders in the politics of this country. They may not know much about business, but they do have some interest, and the government does need them when you want to deploy them in the politics and help them with their election coverage and other things.
Yeah, Mr. Pai, go ahead. You wanted to say something.
You know, Jyoti, there's a fundamental issue which I want to place before you and Jaggi as observers, the political landscape and the economy. And that is, after nearly 75 years of freedom, political power has come to the bottom 40% of society, deeply embedded into our society. We are seeing political leaders come up from the bottom, from the small towns of this country, from other parts of this country, which are not the major metros. They have a very different worldview. So many of them are the first generation educators, second generation education. They are not the urban elite that the Congress or the UPA had. They come from a different thing. And it's a very good thing because political power going deep down in society creates a better, much more vibrant society. Now, the worldview is very different. The way they interact with people is different. The language is very different. So we're going to see this kind of a flux in the states and all across the country for the next 10, 15 years till we come to the middle. What India needs, in my view, is the elitist approach to make India a competitive nation in the global community. We need a particular language. We need a language of the masses to enable the masses to take advantage of opportunities and give them the break that's required, which Prime Minister Modi has done. He has got many programs for the first time to give the necessities of life for every single Indian. That is very essential. We need people deprived of politics, political power to come into power and rule this country and feel engaged. That's very important. So we are in this big, big flux. And that's why we see very different languages from different parts of India. Look at the language of politics in Bengal, in UP, in Karnataka, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, in Bihar, in Gujarat, in Rajasthan. Very, very different, Jyoti. It's up to you and us to reconcile all that.
No, that's a good point that India is in a state of flux as you know, political parties, as sort of the direction of politics is changing. But Jagu, explain to me, in your previous point, you said that there is, the UP elections are coming up just a few months away. Very important for the BJP, must win. The RSS soldiers on the ground, the RSS cadres help the BJP to win. But what has this got to do with Piyush Goyal's comments against the Tatas?
I think that's got entirely to do with his pressure that he is to generate FTAs as quickly as possible. I think that is where I think the pressure is coming from, and he is probably reacting to that. But it's difficult for me to say why exactly he may have taken on the Tatas or whatever it is. But
what UP elections got to do with being critical of Indian industry?
No. It is not related to it, but definitely I think I'm talking about the Sangh role. Yeah. The Sangh may be talking up right now because this is when the BJP needs the Sangh. Otherwise, the Sangh is hardly consulted in government policies and other things. So I think at this stage that Sangh is piping up, or some elements in the Sangh are piping up, because that's when you need them. But after the UP election, they're not going to be needed. So I think they're probably trying to see if they can get a voice in.
So are you saying then that, you know, RSS affiliates like Swadeshi, Jagran Manch, which are sort of traditionally protectionist and do not want Indian industry to sort of look outside, they want their pound of flesh today on the eve of the UP elections when they can afford to assert themselves?
So my guess is that the RSS has never been comfortable with big capital and market economics, right? So, and they're also uncomfortable with policies like privatization and other things. So in that sense, they are part of the broader Indian consensus that's against any kind of market economics here. I think most political parties and RSS are not different in this. If for the first time, this government is breaking away from it, just as Vajpayee's government did. The UPA was completely in conformity with what the RSS thinks should be done. So let's be clear, this is not about RSS and other things. It's about the broad Indian political consensus is against market economics.
No, you're saying something interesting. You're saying that the UPA and the RSS had a similar economic point of view.
In fact, every political party outside the current BJP, which is now moving away from it, and Vajpayee's government, actually the RSS is quite in tune with the economics of the previous, Raj, where the state has a large role to play and where markets play a very muted role. But they do have one thing that is correct, which is the emphasis on small and medium businesses. But the problem is the old protectionist approach to small and medium businesses has ensured that the small companies remain dwarfs rather than have a path to growth. That is what is changing under Modi, and that's again a churn, which will create new billionaires. All those unicorns that are being created now, 25 or 26 in the last 8 months, actually have coming from small guys suddenly becoming medium-sized and scaling up. That's the future of small and medium businesses. Small can't remain small. The RSS is not comfortable with this change that is happening.
So that leads me to two questions, Mr. Pai. The first is that if the RSS is not comfortable with this, it's asserting itself. Jaggi feels that on the eve of the UP elections, when the RSS believes it has more power. But do you agree with Mr. Jagannathan that that Prime Minister Modi does want to privatize much more, lead the country into a much more sort of market economics, which the RSS is fundamentally uncomfortable with?
Well, I think so. There is tension between the two because Prime Minister Modi has been Chief Minister of Gujarat. We've seen Gujarat grow. All the data is there for Gujarat to go. And the reason why Gujarat had grown is because government did what government has to do and he let the industry do what they did. And that's the way jobs have to come. And he understands that very well. All these policies so far has been to build a self-reliant industrial India which doesn't depend on government for crutches and focus the government on the role it has. Jyoti, tell me, do we have the rule of law in this country? Do we have justice in this country? Do we have the public goods like good education available to everybody in this country? Are we in charge of a law and order? Are we giving, the law and order that we need as citizens? We are not. Government has failed in its basic objective of governance and is running steel plants and running all this because the political parties want to put their hand in the pot of gold and take it for themselves, right? Prime Minister Modi understands all this and is steering away. But like Jaggi said, the political concern is very different. To me, the need of the hour is to greater engagement with people in the RSS because they are in government. For example, Mr. Datta Hosbale is from Bangalore, right? BL Santosh is from Bangalore. And we have Mr. Mukundaji who is from Bangalore. I think all of us have to reach out to them and explain to them and tell them what is happening in this country so they understand. I'm sure they understand because Tejasvi Surya has met all of them and explained. They understand. And I hope it percolates other places so we don't have to fight these unnecessary battles. To me, it is more a lack of exposure and the lack of knowledge rather than any ill intent towards anybody.
Yeah.
Jaggi, do you feel that Prime Minister Modi, who wants to, again, take the country towards a more sort of a market form of economics, is he a bit frustrated with the fact that RSS affiliates like the Swadeshi Jagannathan, say the RSS itself, which doesn't understand, within quotes, and does he feel a bit frustrated that the RSS may be holding his dreams back?
No, I think he's more frustrated with the bureaucracy, which actually does not want to let go of public sector. RSS and he have modus vivendi by which they thrash out their differences in private and move forward. So far, the RSS never stopped him from doing anything he wanted to do. But the point is, I think...
Now you have two examples.
Sorry? Yeah, it is true, but it's maybe a short-term thing. But you see, he has never given much patta to people like Swadeshi Jagran Manch and all that who have been shouting from the sidelines, but he has not given them much importance. But I think his real frustration with the IAS, which actually wants to keep control of all the public sector, because that is how patronage and other things are doled out. So if you don't get to run Air India, then where's your power? You just have to make policy and be quiet. But that's where the problem is. The real problem, I think his frustration is there, not with the RSS. RSS, I think he knows how to handle.
Well, he knows how to handle the RSS. But I have a last question for you, Mr. Pai. Do you think that, you cited a few names from the RSS leaders now, Mr. Krishna Hosabale, Mr. Krishna Gopal, Dattatreya Hosabale, from Karnataka, from the south. But my question is, perhaps, is this a north-south thing? The RSS cadres are more North Indian, and perhaps they don't understand, like we talked about, the unicorns that are coming up in South India. Do you think this is a north-south thing, or am I overstating the north-south differences?
No, I think, Jyoti, you've got a very good point of view about north and south, because I travel to north. I used to travel to the north very often. It's a different world. Delhi is a different world compared to the south in Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, or Mumbai. It's a very different world. Viewpoints are very different. What they fight about is very different from what we see in the south. South is much better educated. Jyoti, the gap between the north and south has widened over the last 30 years. It has widened. The north is one generation behind the south. South population growth is come down. Fertility is down dramatically at 1.7. And the north is now dominating. The viewpoints are very different. It's a very different country altogether. We have to solve this. What you say is right. And if you are rooted in the north and the culture of the north and how the north political process is, and you see something happening here, you're not able to understand the change that's happening, obviously viewpoints are going to be different. I think that's one of the fault lines in India which are becoming more and more visible. For example, Jyoti, I go to Calcutta. I used to go to Calcutta very often. I mean, it is back 50 years. You hardly know what they're talking about, what their viewpoint is, right? It's a very different world, Jyoti. So I think, we are unable to comprehend the complexities of this country, and we're trying to build one single narrative in the middle, which can never be. And then when all these voices come up and speak what is in their mind, all of us get alarmed. I think we also have to look at it very differently.
So last question to you, Jaggi. Do you think that there is concern inside the RSS, inside the BJP, that people are making these wild statements, both Mr. Piyush Goyal as well as the editor of Panchjanya?
No, I don't think so. I think they know that the people may speak here and there, but by and large, they will sort out their differences at the top level, where there is a fair amount of consensus and respect for one another. I think Mr. Modi and Mr. Bhagwat are probably two heads of the cultural organization and the political side, who probably have the best ever equations between the RSS and the government. I think it was not so even in the type of Vajpayee. So I think they will sort it out. I think the lower level disequilibrium and voices will get drowned out in due course.
We'll watch this space and see how it's going to sort itself out, because at least in the public space, we haven't seen either Mr. Piyush Goyal being chastised, certainly not the editor of Panchjanya, but we will see whether things happen to either of these men. And thank you both, Mr. Mohandas Pai, Mr. Jagannathan, for speaking to The Print.
Thank you.